Hi, Dan. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. Did we get the Zoom thing worked out?
Robin's taking good care of us here. Unfortunately, she's on vacation.
Oh,
So we're trying not to impede too much on her free time.
yeah.
But
Dan,
we've
how
got
are
it sorted
you?
out. Well, how are you? I don't want to be a distraction, so I'll probably keep my screen. Um, and if we get a call here at work, I'll just leave it running. But I don't want to cause a distraction. And if you could send the slides um, after we're done,
Mhm.
that'd be appreciated.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Absolutely. Hi, Marie. How are
Hi,
you?
Kristen.
How are you?
Nice to see you. Hi, Dan. Robin, we owe you one.
I'm sorry I couldn't do that. We're not allowed to be the host or do the recording or do that because it has to be your meeting. So I'm sorry I wasn't able to do that.
No, good to know. Yeah, how does it work, Kristen, for the certification? Who keeps track of that? Are we supposed to keep track of that, or do
Oh,
you?
for Leadership Institute?
Mhm.
I will report who was here at the meeting
Okay,
and then that'll get put into our system.
okay.
Yeah, that I will keep track of. And you said how many folks are you expecting tonight?
I believe everyone.
Oh, okay,
Everyone confirmed way back that this day would work. So
great.
unless something has come up for folks last minute,
Okay,
I
okay,
expect we'll have everyone present.
great, great. I'll just wait for you to let me know whenever we're starting.
Oh, the Thad likely won't be here. Um, yeah, he's been absent. Um, so it's six. Excuse me. Yeah,
Okay.
and he's our most senior board member, so it's not relevant to him.
Okay.
Unfortunately, his term is ending in June, so that is going to be some big shoes to fill.
Yeah.
But I think he's, he open to us, continuing to consult with him. And of course,
That's good.
Dan's been with us or been leading for quite some time now.
Right. Right.
Julia and Avelia. So that leaves McKenna, Emily, and I as kind of the newbies.
Mm-hmm.
But I did take that webinar on school finance last week and found it really helpful.
Oh,
It's
good.
the kind of
Good.
primer, and the idea that there's last year, the current year, and then the year ahead. You're always kind of in these three zones,
Mm-hmm.
and that things are just always shifting was really um, important.
Yeah, it's a moving target
It's a moving target,
for
right?
sure. Everything changes a lot. It is hard to keep up. But yeah, no, she's a great person to hear from. Jackie Olson is fantastic to hear from. She's the one to hear from. So it was great that Vince got her to chat with us.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like even Jackie Olsen thinks it's complicated. So,
Yeah, she does. Hi, Tandalin.
Hey, thank you, Kristen.
Yeah. When all else fails, you may have your cover on your
Yep, yep. And Henry and Bryce both told me about that, and lo and behold,
when all else fails.
yes, thank you for
And I'll
that.
have you introduce yourself when we get started.
Okay, perfect.
Hi, folks.
Hey.
I'm going to go off screen because I'm still working on pulling dinner together, but I'm here and listening.
It is dinner hour. Totally understandable.
I believe, yes, Emily also attended the school finance webinar.
Oh, good.
Do you know when the next one will be and what
Next webinar. Here, let me look at my calendar really quick. See if I can pinpoint next webinar. Let's see. I don't know that we have another one. Maybe we do. Oh, superintendent evaluation we've got on April 17th. That would be applicable. Not just superintendents, it would be superintendents and executive directors. So that one is on April 17th. That would be our next one.
Okay. Okay, Avelia says she's going to be connecting and she'll have her screen off, but she'll be present.
Marie, what do you feel about getting going? And then
Yeah.
if when other people join, we can have them come in. That way we can be timely.
Yeah.
Is that okay with you, Kristen?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Okay. All right. Need to convene? Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, which you've given me permission to do, which is fabulous. And if you see me, you should be seeing the right thing. If you see me looking over here a little bit, it's because that's where my screen is. So hello, everybody. Nice to see you again. I'm still Kristen Miles, the Director of Board Development at OSBA. I have a very special guest with me tonight who I'm going to have introduce herself. She is our brand new board development specialist who fills in for me as I moved up to the director position. We hired a person to take my place, and we're super excited to have Tandalin Gerber. So I'll maybe just, I don't mean to put you on the spot, Tandalin, but maybe you just want to say a few words about who you are, where you're located in the state, because she's the first person we have who lives very far away, and maybe just a little bit about yourself.
Okay, awesome. Well, can you hear me? Number one.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And you can see me. Kristen made
Yes.
sure of that. Okay, so this week has been a whirlwind because I've been living as a gypsy in Salem. It's my first week hired in this position, and I'm so grateful and thankful. And so I'm proud to meet all of you and humbled to meet all of you. I am from Lakeview, Oregon, and that is 14 miles from the California border. So I am very, very rural Oregon, and I'm in the city right now. So I'm happy to be here with all of you, and I am so grateful to be again observing Kristen tonight. That's what I'll be doing, is training with underneath her with her, observing her. So thank you for letting me be a part of this evening with you guys. I've looked a little bit at your school and your boardmanship, and I'm excited to be here with you. So I'll let Kristen take it from there.
Thank you. So we're here tonight. Oh, did I? Oh, hang on. Nope, I opened the right one. So we've done this before. We've done your name. We've done your time on the board. I want to know before I start what you are hoping to get from tonight. I brought an agenda. We talked, and Marie and I met. We talked about. I've gotten some ideas about what you want from tonight, but I want to make sure also that I am covering what you want. So if you've got questions that you know about in advance, obviously you know the way that I work. If things come up during the session, we're obviously going to talk about those and answer those. But if there's things you want to front load for me to think about as we go through, I just want to give space to talk about that now. Anybody have anything that they want to make sure that we cover tonight?
Do you mind sharing your agenda one more time? And one of the things that I was hoping to get was, okay, yeah, the succession planning part of it was for me, I think is important just long-term, thinking about board members leaving this year, and just thinking about the future, kind of like we do with the financial oversight. You know, you look at last year, the knowledge that's gained by the people who are on the board now and people who may be leaving, the knowledge that they may be leaving with, and trying to get as much from them as possible. Thad being one of our most detailed, he's an engineer, very detailed about the budgets of the past. And so that knowledge is very important for us going forward. And then kind of figuring out, you know, roles moving on, you know, in the next few years. So that for me is important.
Okay.
As board chair, I do enjoy doing this work, but I don't want to be a board chair forever.
Yes.
So, and I think I don't think it's healthy for a board to have the same person be the chair for a long time. I think it's better to have people with different backgrounds and skill sets lead, and I'm happy to support that as well. So
yeah,
that's just that's my thing for tonight.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Anybody else got anything at the top of their mind that they want to make sure that we leave with that's outside of the agenda or that they support on the agenda?
Can you hear me?
A little bit.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. I am specifically interested in the financial oversight part, and also the use of executive session and kind of what process and protocols we need to use in order to utilize that tool.
Okay, great. That is part of the plan. Awesome. Anything else?
I might, sorry, my head is like shifting from work to dinner to this. I have like half-formed questions in my head around committees, and I know that was something that you taught us about last time you came. So I was
Mhm.
going to peek back at my notes and see if those half-formed questions turn into fully formed questions.
Great.
So
That's
just a flag
fine.
for
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. And if we talk about something that's not on the agenda, that's great. This is meant to be the best use of your time, not mine. So yes, questions as they come. Fantastic. Okay. Anything else? Okay. All right. Let's dive in. So let's talk about financial oversight. This looks a little bit different, although not entirely different. This looks a little bit different in charter schools than it does in districts, just because you're closer to the action, right? On a district board, it's a bigger system. There tend to be multiple schools, although not in every district. It's often one school in Oregon, but you tend to be a little closer to the action in a charter school, and it makes it a little more complex. But what I want to do is show you some things and ask you, is this the board's role? So what is board work? Does the board adopt the budget? Is that board work? That is yes, that is board work. The board adopts the budget. How about the board ensuring that the overall budget is aligned to the school's strategic priorities and goals? Is that the board's work? That is the board's work. So I would say that is firmly in the camp of board work. So you the overall strategic priorities and goals, that is part of your work to help set, right? You're working with your executive director to set priorities and goals. You've got community input on that. However you set your strategic priorities for your school, the board's job is to really create, again, collaboratively, but create that vision, that overall vision, and the strategic priorities that lay on top or underneath really of that vision. And what the board's job is to do is to look at the budget and see how the budget supports that strategic vision and those strategic goals. Now, that's not to say that you can reallocate your entire budget, because I know you've got this much discretionary funding, right? Like a lot of this is going to staff, a lot of it is going to your facility. I mean, like there's not a ton to move around. I know that. But to the extent possible, if you've got a strategic priority, how are you aligning your budget, like through PD or through curriculum adoption or through staffing, like how are you aligning that to your strategic goals and priorities? So that is board work. Again, it's collaborative, but it is board work. How about the board examining each line item in the budget? Is that board work?
No.
Kind of, sort of. I generally not. Generally, you're still big picture. So your budget can be pretty detailed. And I mean, I guess it depends on how detailed your budget is. I don't think I've seen, or at least recently, I haven't seen your budget, but if your budget is pretty general, you may be examining each of those things before you are adopting, but picking apart at least each line item in the budget, especially as they get smaller and smaller, what you are looking at still in your financial oversight role is that big picture stuff. So let's say you've got an overall budget for professional development. And underneath that, there may be, here's how we're allocating it for licensed staff. Here's how we're allocating it for support staff. Here's how we're allocating it. That is going to be your director's job to do, right? There comes a point where the line items in a budget become administrative. And that's where you want to make sure that you as a board are still in that oversight role and that you're not taking that administrative and operational role. And so there is somewhat of a gray area there, but you want to make sure that you keep in mind that your job is overall oversight and that you're really looking at the programmatic level of the budget and that you're approving at the big categories as they align with your overall school and strategic goals, not the teeny tiny things underneath. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. How about the board asking for a cash flow statement each month? Does that board work? I would say yes. So a cash flow statement is, so what I do a lot of charter school evaluations, as you likely know. Cash flow statement to me is, can you pay your bills? Can you make payroll? And that's really important for a board to know. So, you can ask for budget to actual, you can ask for profit and loss statement, you can ask for cash flow statement. Those are big, those are big common general reports that are important to have, and they're part of the financial oversight. And it's well within the board's purview to know where you stand financially. I don't see those big overall reports as operational because they help you monitor the overall health of the school. And this is, as you know, where you differ from a district, because just bluntly, a charter school can close because of financial problems, right? A district can't really close in a way, right? But your job is a little different in that you are also the governing body of a 501c3 nonprofit organization. So your job is to keep the organization financially healthy. Asking for cash flow statements, budget to actuals, profit and loss, that's okay. That's okay. Can you pay your bills? That's an okay thing to ask for. How about understanding the audit? Is that the board's role? Yes. Yep. Know how to read your audit, understand your audit. That's a really important thing to be able to do. There's a bunch of stuff in there. I read many audits per year as I do evaluation of charter schools. There are a lot of things, and I don't mean to like dissuade you from anything. There are a lot of things you can skip over that are just sort of like boilerplate stuff, but knowing how to read your statements, the part that has the governmental statements that have your money in it, and especially like your net position, where it came from last year. Are you losing ground? Are you gaining ground? What does your cash look like? What do your liabilities look like? Assets, all of those things. How do you calculate income? All of those things are really important to understand as far as the health of the organization. It's all looking backward, but there are some indications of what that looks like going forward. So it's absolutely imperative to understand the audit. That may have been the last one. How about this? The board approves every expenditure. No. And this is what I always say. It's not that you don't get to, you don't have to. I'm sure I've said this to you before. It's not, you don't want to. This is not the position you want to be in. You hire somebody to do this for you. And you don't, in fact, I'm going to show you a couple of your financial policies. I think you don't even get to below a certain point, but your job is to trust the person that you've hired to do the daily management of your organization to do the spending. You adopt the budget and then you hand it over to be spent to a certain degree, and then you monitor the health of the organization as it goes on. Does this all make sense? Yeah, Marie.
Yeah, can you speak to the limit?
The limit,
Mhm.
like what the threshold is for
Threshold.
approving?
Mhm.
Uh-huh. I'm going to show you one of your policies that has that in it.
Okay.
In fact, it's this. So your policy DJ says that, and you're not meant to read this whole thing, but I highlighted a couple of pertinent things that, you authorize your executive director to serve as the purchasing agent, and they are responsible for developing and administrating the purchasing program. They are authorized to enter and approve payment on contracts not to exceed $10,000. So they can do anything below $10,000. Anything above that has to come to the board.
Mhm.
So, and that is, and I get asked a lot, well, is that a common number? And I will tell you, it varies. Like I see policies DJ that go anywhere from like $1,000 to $20,000. It varies. And I think, what you would find is the lower it gets, the more often it comes to the board for things that like need to be purchased right away, and then boards end up having emergency meetings. Well, they're not technically emergencies, but they end up having last minute meetings to approve something that that just needs to be bought. So this probably is an amount that probably works for you, but that's the limit. But thank you for that segue right into that. It was like I'd asked you to do that. It was like you were a plant in the audience. The other thing that I wanted to show you is the kinds of fun. Oh yeah, Dan.
I just to clarify that for the other board members, I think it's fairly obvious, but I just want to make sure. It's like if we have to spend our time in the minutia, it's going to take all of our time, and we'll be meeting constantly to approve all those kinds of things. So finding an appropriate threshold where it's not going to greatly impact the budget overall to make these decisions, then we trust that ED is doing those things in a way that's appropriate. So it's just, that's why that limit's there. Yep. So I just wanted to say that. Maybe you're all already on board with that. And it's just redundant what I'm saying, but I just kind of wanted to add that to that.
Yeah. That's good. Good context. Thank you. The other thing I wanted to show you was your policy DIC, which talks about the kind of reports that you can expect as per your own policy. And it says will receive. So per your own policy, it doesn't say may, it says will. So these are the kinds of things you can expect. Estimates of expenditures, actual receipts in comparison to budget estimates, your overall cash condition, supplementary reports. You can receive, and this says may, a pre-audit report recapping the end of year closure or year-end closure of financial statements. And it does say that, you can have staff available to you to respond to questions and to present current financial information, and that you will be notified of any substantial deviations in anticipated revenues or expenditures. So, where I see this happen a lot is if enrollment comes in significantly lower than something that you would expect, that often drives a significant decrease in revenue or something like that. Or if the state school fund kicked up a whole bunch and you've got, like a whole bunch of revenue, then that's something the board would probably like to know as well. So those are two financial policies that I just wanted to pull for you and highlight. But your financial policy section is section D. If you're interested in reading that, it's not super long. You've just got a few there. Those are the key ones I wanted to pull for you. But in summary for financial oversight, and then I'll let you ask questions. It really is that, we start at the 30,000 foot level, and you do need to get a little more granular. Again, those either quarterly or monthly reports help you keep track and monitor, but I have seen boards where one member of the board is literally like balancing the checkbook at board meetings, and I'm like, no, like that's not what you want to do. That's not your job. But you know, so while can be a gray area, you just want to make sure again that you're sitting on top of the system and not doing the job of somebody that you've hired to manage the daily budget. What questions do you have about financial oversight?
I have a question.
Yeah.
When I was on a nonprofit board previously, they really drove home that we as a board were financially liable or responsible. I don't remember exactly what language they used, but could you talk a little bit about like legally what is expected of us?
Yeah. One thing I say probably 12 times a day is I'm not an attorney, so I can't give legal advice. But I will say you probably have, if you've got PACE insurance through us, you probably have D&O insurance, which is directors and officers insurance. I believe that that there are certain protections for you based on the kind of insurance you have, that if something goes wrong at school, you are generally likely not held personally financially liable for those, you know, for if something goes wrong, unless there is cause and unless it's purposeful, you know, unless there is an investigation and there's shown to be malfeasance or, you know, embezzlement or something like that. I have seen, and I'm not saying this is your situation, but as an extreme example, I've seen a couple of charter schools close for financial reasons. They left in debt. The individuals on the board were not held financially responsible for that debt. It just closed as bad debt. And because there was no wrongdoing on anybody's part, it was just, you know, it's just the school failed financially. So, so I would say it's probably a different story if there's, you know, found to be wrongdoing, but in the case where there's not, at least in my experience, there hasn't been any finding of fault. Great question. Anything else you want to cover when we're talking about financial oversight? Yeah, Marie.
Yeah. I suppose, you know, I'd like to know in your time working with different boards of public charter schools, what are some mistakes that you've seen or challenges or things that, you know, maybe would be helpful for us to know, red flags, I don't know, any kind of advice?
Yeah.
Give us as a board of a public charter.
Yeah. As far as financial stuff.
Yeah, financial oversight, I don't know, pearls of wisdom, I guess is what I'm.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's, and I mean, like, I am not like trying to be like the, you know, the harbinger of like terrible things or the black cloud over anything, but I can tell you what I've seen go wrong. Because the opposite of that is what is really helpful. So let me tell you what I've seen go wrong. When things have gone poorly in my experience, it's when there tends to be a cycle of loss. So what I mean by that is, so I worked with a charter school in Portland Public Schools that ended up closing. The first, and for financial reasons, the first sign of what was going wrong there was 2 years in a row, there was 100% of teacher turnover. 100% of teachers turned over 2 years in a row. Families started to leave because of that, because like they were not connecting with teachers. Those relationships started being lost, you know, like that close-knit community started to fall apart. Families started to leave. So revenue was stopped, like what they were budgeting for was not coming in anymore. And then, you know, the board wasn't really, they weren't savvy financially. They weren't planning for, you know, they weren't They weren't doing, they weren't really doing any grant writing or anything. Not that that is a sustainable way to run a school, which I don't believe that it is. I mean, that's good for extra stuff. It's not good for sustainability. But they, you know, their teacher retention program and the culture of that school allowed it to become an environment in which teachers wanted to leave. When teachers started to leave, families started to leave. When families started to leave, they financially tanked. And that's what happened. And so even before it became a financial problem, it was a school culture problem. And so it didn't start out as a financial problem, but it became one. And so, I mean, all of these things are so intertwined. When I see things start to get shaky, it's often because enrollment is not coming in where expected. Anytime enrollment is less than 95% of what you expect, things can get a little dicey. And not necessarily, but they can. And I think that, you know, the board doing some really good planning ahead, projecting to the extent possible. I'm really glad that you watched that, you know, that financial that seminar, that webinar that we did the other day, just to understand school finance. I think that's, you know, I mean, that's a great thing to just understand how the state is paying us, how that whole thing works. That's really good to understand. You know, ODE can change its projections. It can change what it's paying. It can change its estimates and warrants, like things can change. And budgeting conservatively is always better. You should always budget less than you intend to receive. And so even though you know you're going to write a grant that's going to bring in $75,000 this year, don't plan for it. Like, don't plan for it and budget without it. And you know, and grants, don't think of grants as sustainable. Like, you know, they're going to pay for this thing this year, but they're not part of our ongoing operating system. And so those are kind of the things that I have seen. I don't know if that helps.
No, that's really helpful. And, you know, nationally, I've seen some statistics that show that Oregon is experiencing, I think, the fourth greatest percentage of enrollment decrease, around 5.4%. So, you know, as we experience a decrease in enrollment, I know I'm trying to, you know, kind of keep an eye on what's happening in the state and to kind of remind myself that we're not alone. So even
no, yeah, you are not alone.
And so, but schools sustainability is heavily reliant on enrollment. So it's just something that, as a, you know, newer board member, you know, learning about. And so yeah, anyhow, that was very helpful. And I think also, yeah, that notion that grants, while they're helpful, they're not a sustainable form of funding. And also they are incredibly taxing on the staff or the folks who undertake, you know, the grant writing and then the reporting and all that. Right. So
yeah. Yep.
Dan, I have a question for you, maybe, if you're there. Are we kind of in that spot that Kristen was just talking about, of the, you know, less than 95% of what we were expecting for enrollment?
Yeah, so we had our budget is set off of 180 right now, and we started the year around 165, and we're less than that now. So we knew we were in that. So part of that, we have our accounts we put money in if we know we're going to have to pay money back. So last year we received money because we had a higher expected enrollment than we anticipated for. The next cycle, we're going to have to pay money back, which is why we have that reserve account for that. What happens is if we don't have the money set aside and we spend it, and we aren't planning on having to pay anything back, then it will come out of the next year's, it would have come out of the next year's budget if it's something you aren't accounting for. But that's something that we have put money into for quite some time to be ready for that. One of the things with, the challenges we face this year, the strength that we have is the fact that the board has been conservative in the past and put lots of money aside. So we have a year's operating budget set aside so that for 1 year, if we took no money in, we could still operate. But yes, those are so when you look at like Kristen was talking about, the indicators of a school having issues. Do we have teacher retention issues? Do we have, if we had teacher retention issues, which we have had in the past, we don't have now, but that was one of the things we worked to solve over the last 2 years was, okay, and it took some heavy lifting, but let's make sure we have paying our teachers appropriately so that they don't feel like they need to leave to find a better pay. So that, and also doing, exit interviews for teachers that do leave to figure out why do they leave. So, I mean, it's all connected, but it starts from the classroom and works its way out. And so as a board, if we focus on supporting our ED and focusing on that part of our school, then we're building that healthy environment. But the financials, we have these key indicators, retention of teachers, enrollment, decline, things like that we have to keep our eyes on, make sure, if one of these things is happening, then we have to take action. So, and we're in a stage right now where we are taking action for both ED stuff, lots of different fronts. So is that, Emily, okay. And Amelia has her hand up, but Kristen, I'll let you run it unless it's a question for me.
No, go ahead, Amelia.
Go ahead, Amelia.
To not have to pull from this coming year's money that will be received to just make up that difference of money that we won't receive because our enrollment is lower. So he's wanted to make sure also, so there is money aside to not have that greater impact on teachers and classrooms.
Yes, thank you.
And that's good. If you've got a contingency or something, I mean, that's, that's great. That's good planning. All districts right now and all charter schools that I know of are struggling with enrollment. Everybody's lost some percentage of enrollment. That's hard. Okay. Any other questions on this part?
I guess I just have one more statement. Sorry to interrupt. It's one of those things where our buffer in our budget allows us the flexibility to not take action, kind of what Thad has talked about. And so that allows us to try and absorb the bump up and down, whatever it may be. The goal is that our actions that we're taking currently increase our enrollment long term. And, we have a couple down years here that we pay money back to, but we come out on the other side with something that, that we're all proud of, that we've worked hard to make. So I feel like that's the path we're headed on right now.
That's awesome. Hey, Kristen, I do have one more question. I attended the state budgeting training the other day and probably need to attend it like 4 more times before I understand what's going on. But I'm wondering, do you have is there a training that you all do that is more in the weeds for board budgets? I'm just not really familiar with budgets and some of the financial details. And when you're talking about understanding the audit and things like that, do you have training at that level?
We don't have a super specific in the weeds training. That's something that I could certainly develop for you. Like if we get together again, I could walk you through your audit, and as a non-accountant, right? I give you all the disclaimers. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a CPA, I'm just an educator. But I can, and I'm sure like there's probably somebody on your board that could do this too, but I'm happy to give you, I'm happy to support in any way that I can. If there's a need by the whole board, you know, to do that, I'm happy to do that. Dan?
And what I want to do before Thad leaves our board is sit down and have a board training with him, because he has been an integral part of setting the budget over the last 4 to 6 years. And so we can take all those budgets that we've adopted over the, you know, starting with the one that we were all a part of last June, and going back, you know, every single year and saying, okay, here's how this has transpired. We've had different business managers along the way. There's been a change of accounting practices from last year to this year. So I think that's the kind of training that we need to have as a board together, with Thad leading that, as, okay, let's just go and focus on all the stuff so that everyone's on the same page with that. And I mean, I think that's going to be one of the most useful things. And Kristen, if you want to sit in on that and add your context, I think it'd also be greatly appreciated. But I think that would be the best way for us as a board to really come to understand our budget and how it relates to our school, you know, on a very personal level that way.
That's
Yeah, and
very helpful.
we are very, very lucky to have a professional on our board. Avelia, who's acting as our treasurer, is a business consultant, and so we are very, very blessed. And I just cannot imagine how school boards who don't have somebody who's well-versed in the language of business and finance make it.
It's really hard. Yeah.
So I think between Thad and Avelia and, you know, that sounds like it would be a really great opportunity to go over our audit. And
that's great. Good. Yeah. I mean, I always say the wisdom's in the room, and if you've got it on your board, that's a great thing to do. And we can talk about that when we get to transition planning as well. Like, how do you get, you know, the information from somebody who's leaving? Are we ready to talk about executive session a little bit? Okay. Let's go over the reasons that you can go into executive session, then we can talk about whatever questions you have about that. Now, again, I'm not an attorney, so what I can tell you is what the law says about why you can go into executive session. Now, if you called me and said, hey, does this qualify? What do you think about this? I would have to send you to an attorney because I can't interpret the law for you. But what I can tell you is what is in the law. And there are a couple new reasons that were passed last legislative session that give you a couple more reasons to go into executive session. So the first one is if you are hiring your chief officer. So if you were hiring a director, you would have to meet certain criteria in order to go into executive session. And in fact, you would have to have adopted procedures, policies, qualities and qualifications, and you would have to have given the public a chance to weigh in on what those were prior to going into executive session. If you do all of those things, and there's more information out there, I mean, I'm just giving you the sort of the Cliff Notes version of this, but if you do all of these things and meet this criteria, then you could have interviews and other pieces of that in executive session. If you don't do any of those pieces in public, then you can't use executive session for hiring, but you can use executive session for hiring if you meet a number of criteria. You can consider the dismissal or discipline of someone unless, or charges brought against them, meaning that if a complaint about somebody comes all the way up to you, this is when, so if you're considering the dismissal of your director, or a complaint about an individual comes all the way up to the board, you can have this in executive session. In either of those cases, since this is about a person, you have to give them 24 hours notice that you're going to talk about them in executive session, and they get to say whether or not that's okay, or whether or not they want you to talk about that in an open session, which sometimes happens. So so it's that person's right to request an open hearing, but you can do that in executive session. Are you one of the few that has a union, that where your teachers are unionized? That's what I thought. I thought you were one of the few charter schools. So if you've got somebody that is designated to do negotiations with your union, you can meet with them in executive session. If you've got somebody designated, if you're going to buy a property and you want to conduct deliberations about your real property transactions, you can do that in executive session. If there are records exempt by law, some of those are executive session records that you might go over in executive session. I mean, you can look at exempt records. Now, what I will always tell you is, how do you know when something is exempt? You're going to want to discuss that with an attorney. It is not necessarily something I would recommend to decide on your own. If something is exempt, that would be good advice for an attorney to give you whether or not you should discuss a certain record in executive session. It's good legal advice to get. If you are in a lawsuit or there is a possible lawsuit that you're looking at, you can consult with your attorney in executive session. It says specifically here to consult with counsel. So what that likely means is that you have to meet with your attorney to talk about this. It's not just something the board would talk about on its own. This says to consult with counsel. So if you're talking about litigation that's likely to be filed or litigation that is current, you're consulting with your attorney in that executive session. This is a common one to evaluate your executive director. And again, because you're talking about a person, they can say whether or not that happens in public. You'd have to give them 24 hours notice, and they can say, no, I want you to do this in a public session, which also sometimes happens. But in fact, I've facilitated one of those that was done in public. But most of the time that's done in executive session. You can evaluate your director in executive session. This one, it used to be the newest one, to consider matters that relate to school safety or a plan that responds to safety threats made toward a school. If you are considering a plan to do that, you can discuss that plan in executive session. Anything student related, generally, this comes from a different law. Most of the executive session pieces come from a specific law. Stuff that has to do with students comes from a different law. But when you're conducting a hearing on expulsion or to review a student's confidential medical or educational records, anything to do with a student, you're going to have that in executive session. I think unless the parent requests that in public, but most of the time that doesn't happen. The default is to do that in executive session. This is a new one. To consider matters relating to the safety of the governing body and of public body staff and volunteers, and the security of public body facilities and meeting spaces. So threats toward the board, threats towards staff, threats towards buildings, or to consider a plan related to the safety of those people and places. You can discuss that in executive session. And finally, to consider, this is also a new one, to consider matters related to cybersecurity infrastructures and responses to cybersecurity threats. That is also newly articulated in the law. You can discuss that in executive session as well. Those are the reasons you can go into executive session. Do you want to know about the process for doing that? Is that one of the questions?
Yes, one of the questions I had was if you can, like, if you have to notice executive session or if you can just choose to go into it in real time.
So an executive session is not a meeting itself, it's an agenda item on a meeting. So even if you are just meeting to have an executive session, you have to open a public meeting, then you have to go into executive session, then you have to come out of executive session and close the public meeting. So and that happens a lot. Boards are just meeting in executive session, say, to evaluate their director or their superintendent. They still got to go into public session. They still got to, then go into and then come out. So you do have to notice it just like you would any other meeting. and you have to notice it so that folks know why you're going in. You don't give details, but we always recommend you say what the law says, what the description of the provision of the law says. So for instance, if I'm looking at part I, to review and evaluate the performance of the superintendent or any other public officer, employee, or staff member, I'm gonna say the board will meet in executive session to review and evaluate the performance of the executive director as per ORS 1926602I. And so that the public they know why you're meeting in executive session. They're not going to know the details about what you've said, but it indicates to them why you're meeting in executive session. They're not going to see the minutes. They're not going to be present for that session. But they are going to know why you're going into executive session. So you do have to post that on your agenda. Any questions about that or the minutes? The minutes have to be kept in a different location than other minutes. They don't get published, right? They are confidential records. It's best to just keep those in a separate confidential place that that no one else has access to, or that the public does not have access to. If you received a public records request for minutes, you would run that through an attorney. There are a few times where sometimes those records are revealed, but again, that's for an attorney to decide whether or not those records are disclosable. I'm trying to think of a time that I know of. I just know anecdotally there are times that sometimes there are records that are provided, but not very often. And nobody gets to come in except by your invitation, except the media. Do you know that law about the media? So in Oregon, there's a funny law that says that except for anything to do with students, anything to do with labor negotiations, or anything to do with litigation, if the litigation is about a particular media outlet, the media gets to come in and listen to your executive sessions. They don't get to report unless you go off topic. So if you're in, this is an easy one to go off topic on. If you're evaluating your executive director and you start talking about general school goals or general plans or your strategic plan or something like that, you're off topic. You're not talking about evaluation anymore. That reporter can now report on what you've said because they're like, hey, they're off topic. They broke the law. And now they can report on what you've said. Otherwise, they cannot report. They're just listening. But that's one that's not doesn't exist in every state. And it's probably rare for you. I don't know that would ever happen for you, but we make that information available. Any questions on executive session? And I can send you these slides so you've got this list too. Okay. All right. We will keep moving forward. Oh yeah, Dan.
If anybody ever has a question in related to like forming a board meeting, you could just type in ORS exec session in Google and it'll give you this list. It's quick, it's easy to find very quickly. So just in case you come upon that, you need to know what they are in any moment. I use them every time we do an exec session. I just cut and paste them from Google or from the OS website.
Yep. Or you could be a total nerd like me and have the Attorney General's public meetings and records manual saved on your desktop and look at that 6 or 7 times a day. It's great. I referenced it today. Okay, moving on. There was some interest in the board's role in culture and climate. of the school. And I'm just going to go over this a little bit. If this is not something that you want to dive into deeply, that's okay. But I want to walk you through a couple of the standards. I know that when we did basic roles and responsibilities, we went through the 12 standards that the board, when you're performing these 12 standards, you're really doing your basic roles and responsibilities when you're working toward these. And I wanted to dive a little deeply into like the board's role in creating culture and climate, and how that supports all students, and what is your job within that? What does the research say that your job is within that? When you're performing these things well, how does that impact students? And so so when we go through, because I didn't dive super deeply into those standards, so I'm going to take two and dive a little bit into those standards. Standard 7 is about culture and climate. And so that says, this is from the balanced governance self-assessment and also those standards that I went over with you, that the board creates a climate of expectations that all students can learn at their highest level. And the board supports policy and procedures that foster a positive and safe learning environment. The board models professional relationships and a culture of mutual respect with staff and community. The board models and establishes an organizational culture of service. So what does that look like? It's a lot of words. What does it look like? It means that the board itself builds relationships built on trust and respect with yourself, with your director. That's pretty straightforward. Your relationship with each other and with your director is built on trust and respect. You take time to reflect on those relationships. So that can look like a self-evaluation. That can look just like a conversation at a board meeting. That can look like a board operating agreement or a board director operating agreement, but taking time to reflect on what those relationships look like is important. You regularly assess, you hold the school accountable, and you provide support for the improvement of school culture and climate. That means checking in, right? How do you hold something accountable? You measure it and you check in on it. So what does that mean? That can look like a climate survey, that can look like a listening session, that can look like a goal for your executive director to report back on. That can look like the kind of feedback that is appropriate within your role as the overarching governance body, not management body. But and that can also look like watching your enrollment numbers too, because as I talked about earlier, like, you know, when enrollment started to decline in the school that I talked about, it started out with culture and climate. And so you know, watching our families staying, our teachers staying, and holding the school accountable to a positive culture. You create a system in which high levels of student learning are expected. So what is your vision, essentially? Like, what are your strategic priorities? What is your vision for every student? What do you talk about at board meetings? What is your expectation for every kid? And how do you verbalize that? How do you articulate that? How does the board model that in your work? And then you establish policies and you ensure practices to foster a safe, positive climate for students. So what do your policies look like? What do your expectations for your director look like? You know, what are the kinds of things that you are doing? What is the professional development that you are setting aside money for? What is the expectation that you have? What do you talk about at board meetings that that ensures a safe and positive, welcoming climate for all kids? And then you model and hold the school responsible for improving a culture of service. So as a board member, I'm a board member as well. As a board member, we are all in it for service. And one of the important things that that research shows is that a service orientation and modeling a service orientation benefits kids. So when we as a board are there and are vocal about the fact that, like, we're here for service, we're clearly not here for our own resumes, like we're here to serve kids and serve a system, that can benefit kids as well. Any questions on this or thoughts? Maybe like, hey, we do this really well, or we need some improvement in this area. Anything resonate with you?
I think it all resonates. I think we're doing a really good job in it, and I just really like seeing this articulated. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. That's great. The other one I wanted to go through that there seemed to be some interest in ahead of time was cultural responsiveness, which is standard 6. And this is the board recognizes cultural diversity in its many facets, including social, economic, political, religious, geographical, generational, linguistic, ethnic, racial, sexual orientation, gender identification, and students with special needs. The board develops an understanding of this diversity and applies perspectives responsive to the cultures in their community in policy and program approvals. The board supports effective community engagement and expectancy strategies to build on the strengths of a community's cultural diversity. So what does that look like? Again, a lot of words. Board outreach and community engagement activities accommodate cultural differences in values and communications. So what kinds of activities and what kinds of outreach from the school speak to whom? And who are you drawing to you? Who are you going out and seeing? Who are you accommodating in the kinds of celebrations that you do, in the kinds of outreach that you do? Like, who is the board trying to reach, and who do you want? So you're doing outreach, but who do you want to come to you as well? And oftentimes we ask folks to come to us, but what we really need to do is go to them. And so what does that look like in your school? The board actively encourages and expects, this says the superintendent, but in your case, it would be the director, to facilitate the participation of culturally diverse groups. So again, this would not be the governance level, but this would be the management level, and that there's an expectation there by the board that the director is in their role and in their capacity doing outreach on the ground in the school to culturally diverse groups as well. So whatever feedback that looks like, whatever needs folks have at school, ensuring that everybody feels comfortable, safe, and welcome at school on a daily basis, and that the board sets that as a clear expectation. The board has a process to review policies for cultural responsiveness and bias. A lot of boards do this through an equity lens. And I do a lot of work helping boards build an equity lens and then just putting it right over new policy adoption and saying, okay, who does this benefit? Who receives a detriment from this? Who was at the table for this? Who was not at the table for this? What are the unintended consequences of this? And so, and really just running through a list of 5 or 6 questions, looking at new program approvals, looking at new policy approvals, policies that don't come directly from law, right? Sometimes you're going to get policies that come straight from law and there's nothing you can change and there's nothing you can do. But when you've got say in what a policy says, like there's a lot of bracketed language or it's just really open-ended, what can you do to ensure that you're checking for cultural responsiveness and bias? Board members approach decision-making considering the many facets of cultural diversity, including those indicated in this standard. So you're looking at your decision-making. I think this is another way of saying you're applying an equity lens, but you're also applying that community engagement piece. So, and you're talking about it out loud. I think that's one of the most important things a board can do is talk about the importance of looking at and including multiple perspectives in its decision-making, talking about that at board meetings. Folks do not know that you're taking that into consideration unless you say it out loud and unless you make it part of your practice, but unless you're really explicit about it, people just don't know, and they wouldn't know. The board ensures employees are representative of the values and culture of the community. So if you've got a culture that celebrates diversity, that celebrates equity? Like, you know, are your employees expected to be part of that value system as well? And of course, what's beautiful about bringing in new folks is that they get to bring their voices and perspectives in as well, and those get to be, you know, woven in to the system. And it's a great balance of here's who we are, here's what we celebrate, and we want your voice in this too, but making sure that you know, nobody is undermining the kind of values that you've put forward. A climate of caring, respect, and the valuing of students' cultures is established through board policies and goals. So this is really just ensuring that, again, you're modeling that you care about all kids and each kid, and that your policies show that you value every kid's culture, where they come from and who they are and what they bring to your school. And then the board ensures, in your case, the director holds all employees accountable for high standards and expectations for each and every student. That there are no differing expectations based on any sort of bias, and that that every student that the board believes every student can learn and will learn and gets the same and equitable opportunities to succeed at your school. And that's what the board can do in its role and its capacity. Any thoughts about that, or anything resonate, or anything you want to discuss there? Nothing there.
Well, I feel like this also all resonates, and we have some work where we could improve. I'm just thinking, like last night we had a meeting, a community meeting, and didn't see a lot of diversity in the folks who showed up. And so, like, probably need to be thinking about what our outreach looks like to the community and going to people instead of asking them to come to us.
Yeah, that point, going to folks who are not seeing resonates, and I think that's something that we need to work on, is figuring out you know, times or days, or you know, when how do we reach more of the stakeholders at the school?
Yeah. Avelia?
Yes. To that note, I think maybe culturally it's more of that individual, making it very individual, maybe reaching out by phone and just really making it into a very individual, inviting way, and also just very clear communication of what it is, because sometimes I have found myself in a sense that sometimes families aren't as literate as we might think, and they might not be even able to read the communications that are being sent out.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, another thing that that I have found with, if you're, you know, looking for folks to come to events or come to listening sessions or come to meetings, that providing food and babysitting or childcare at a meeting is really important. That can get a lot of people there. I have facilitated really large scale community listening sessions before, where food and childcare was provided, brought a lot of people out who may not otherwise have been able to come. And that can be a real draw. And like you've already mentioned, like other dates, times, like, you know, maybe like a board meeting time isn't always when or during the day. Some, you know, I mean, like everybody's schedule is really different, and maybe doing things at a couple of different times. Maybe there's an evening thing and maybe there's a daytime thing, or maybe there's a weekend thing, or, you know, something like that. Or maybe there's a survey as to like, you know, when is the best time, depending on, you know, what you're like, for like a couple of different, like maybe you're looking at the 2 best times for something, you know, like does this look like we should do this on a weekend and we should do this on a Monday morning? I mean, you never know what's going to pop up as far as what families' needs are. Sometimes I think we plan for what we think it is, and then it turns out to be something else.
Yeah, I think to Avelia's point about reaching out individually, you know, that seems, you know, if I were to be, you know, prior to being a board member, I'm just trying to imagine a scenario where I'm a new parent at a school, maybe I don't know a lot of folks, and I receive a call from a board member to just say, hey, I'm a board member. My child goes to the same school. You know, here's my number. If you ever have any, you know, questions or concerns, feel free to call. I mean, are we allowed to? I mean, I think we're allowed to do that.
Yeah, you can do that.
And if, you know, we don't have a huge school population, so I wonder if, you know, between the 7 of us, if we each called 25 people, I mean, maybe, you know, it might actually, I don't know, it's kind of brilliant, Avelia.
That's great.
I mean, at least it shows that you're trying. People don't answer if they don't feel like talking to you, that's fine, you know, but at least it shows that, you know, we tried.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and if it's innovative, if it's something different you've never done before, why not? You know, it's personal outreach. I mean, yeah, that's great. And then you're doing that outreach to every single person individually. That's a great idea.
I have one concern. Would folks, there's no school directory that goes home with students. So are people, have you seen folks, you know, maybe not want to be called or upset because their phone number was shared, or I don't know, what does that look like?
Typically, if it comes from the school, they're not, you know, like if it came from another student or another parent, I think that would be like, well, I didn't give my number out to another family. But if it's coming from the school, that might be more expected. Yeah. Great idea. Look, you're coming up with great ideas. This is great. You're gonna leave here with a plan. I love it. Any other thoughts, questions about that? Okay. There was some question about like, let's talk about what's appropriate for public session, what's not appropriate to talk about in public session. So let's look at that for a minute. Okay, what are the kinds of things that we can talk about during a public session? Factual information, that's always going to be okay, right? Like we talk about facts during public session. We talk about data. Data can be good, it can be bad. It's good to talk about it. Let's be transparent about what our data is. Like I said, I'm a board member. When my superintendent is really transparent about our data, it's good for the community too. It's good for me as a board member. So we talk about data. Reports, you can get reports from your director. You can get reports from staff. You can get reports about finance. Like that's an appropriate thing to talk about. That's what we talk about during public session. Asking clarifying questions, absolutely. You get a report, you hear a presentation, you're going to ask clarifying questions. What does this mean? You know, like you want to walk away understanding what you're being asked to do as a board member. So asking clarifying questions, totally appropriate. That's our job as board members. And request for further information. You may need more. There may be times where your director does not have the information you're asking for, at the board meeting, so you may need more, or there may be like, hey, there's going to be follow-up at the next board meeting or at another board meeting when we have more data. So talking about like what might come in the future, totally, this is part of what public session is about. Does that make sense? And discussion of future agenda topics, which I kind of just alluded to, talking in public. Now, I know that like sometimes the agenda is kind of built behind the scenes, maybe a little bit. That often happens between the board chair and the director. That's pretty common. But if the board has a way to weigh in during the board meeting about like, here's something I'd like to hear more about at some point, that's something that is appropriate for public session as well. What do we not do in public session? We don't reveal confidential information, right? We certainly don't talk about anything in executive session. I have unfortunately heard board members say something like, well, I think this investigation may be over, but I'm gonna reveal this kind of thing. And it's like, what? No, that's not a thing you can talk about. So anything that you're not sure, if you think it's confidential, don't talk about it in public session. That can be something that's HR related. That's important. Be really careful with HR related stuff that has to deal with somebody else that's likely to be confidential. As I have maybe said to you in the past, but I say it all the time, OSBA is risk averse on your behalf. And so like, I'm always going to tell you, be more careful than maybe you have to be. But when it comes to HR stuff, be really careful about what you talk about in public. Certainly anything executive session related. And the other thing is public complaints that have not gone through the process. This is a big one that happens a lot. So that can show up in a number of ways. That can show up in somebody comes to make public comment. They sort of issue a complaint. They have not gone through the process, but it turns into a board discussion that has circumvented the process. And that's not the point of the process. In fact, that's sort of an inequitable advantage for the person that just came to testify at the meeting, because they got the benefit of going straight to the board who's now dealing with their thing, as opposed to everybody else who has to go through the process. So there's an inequity in the system if the board takes up that complaint at the board meeting. The other thing is, you don't know where that conversation is going to go. That is uncontrollable. You could lose control of your meeting at that point. And the other thing is, you want to give your director a chance to handle something. The board is the last stop, not the first. And you want to give the system an opportunity to handle something before it comes to you. What somebody may be talking about may be 100% administrative in nature and would never come to you if it was allowed to be dealt with at the school level. And that's what we want. We want the board to never have to process complaints because they're dealt with in the lower end of the system. So, so taking up complaints at the board meeting is not something that we want to be doing. The other way that can come forward is if we as board members have heard something on the side or have been talking to someone on the side and we just bring it to the board meeting. Hey, during reflection time or whatever, I've been hearing from folks that blah, 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 I'm bringing this up at the board meeting. Again, that circumvents the process. Then I'm using my privilege as a board member to bring something forward on behalf of somebody else. That creates an inequity in the system. And again, we lose control of the meeting. So, so that is a tough one. Super slippery slope there. Happens all the time. So those are the things that we want to make sure are not part of the meeting, and that we maintain control of the meeting by not revealing confidential information and not taking up complaints at the board meeting. Does that make sense? Questions?
The last example that you just gave, could you just say that again in another way so I make sure that I'm tracking you?
The part about board members bringing something to the meeting?
Yeah.
Okay. So, so I'm a board member. I'll just use myself as an example. I know people in the district, people that are my kids' friends' parents. And let's say somebody comes to me, one of them who knows me comes to me with an issue. And I bring that issue to the board meeting. It may not be something that is relevant. It may be that I am helping them process a complaint at the board meeting instead of going through the process. And again, that creates an inequity in the system because I'm, instead of being like, hey, if you've got this issue, I should be redirecting them to the process. But instead, I'm championing their issue and bringing it straight to the board meeting, which I have not let the system try and take care of that problem and say that I'm the last stop, not the first. And I've not let the school, the superintendent, the administration try and handle that issue. I've just been like, oh, I'm a board member. I'm the champion of your issue. I'm bringing this up at the meeting now. And so that's what I mean, like taking on individual stuff for folks and bringing it to the meeting.
Okay, so that does help because that is different than if we are noticing and hearing from our school community members that there are like multiple people who have concerns, or that there's something that something that's not working well for the broader community, and we talk about that as a board.
I think that, yeah, if there is sort of a community-based thing that I think what you want to do at some point, if there's whole board involvement and there's a community-based thing that's bigger than one board member with one thing, that you want to make it an agenda item, right? That it's still, you don't want it to be a surprise to your administrator. You don't ever want it to make it feel like I'm surprising everyone by bringing this to a board meeting. But you want to, if it's a serious enough thing, or if it's a concern enough, or if it's something that is like, yeah, we need to deal with this and there's a board role in this, consider making that an agenda item so that nobody's surprised and that everybody's prepared to come and discuss that, including your administrator. Other thoughts on this? Okay. Oh, and surprises. That was the last one I put. We don't want to do surprises, which I just said. Okay, let's talk about succession planning. There are benefits and there are challenges to succession planning. What do you think? What are your thoughts? What are the benefits about turnover? When we talk about board turnover, we talk about administrative turnover. Like, what are the, I know you're thinking about board right now. What are the benefits?
New ideas.
New ideas. Yep.
A change in leadership can get stale over time. You focus on the same things, and bringing new perspectives in can help make sure that we're really taking care of everything that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So I just feel, everybody has their own personality and their own background they're coming with. And if you have some changeover, it helps out.
Yep. Absolutely. New ideas, fresh thoughts. Yeah, Marie.
I'd say energy,
Mm-hmm.
motivation.
Yep. New energy, motivation. It's great. Anything else? I mean, those are great. What are the challenges?
Institutional knowledge leaving.
Mm-hmm. Institutional knowledge leaving. Yep.
It's time consuming and energy consuming to bring folks up to speed.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Time consuming. It's hard to fill roles. Can be hard to recruit. Anything else? Okay. Let's talk a little bit about some of the technical steps in transition planning that I would recommend and that I've seen in my experience that help work well. I recommend job descriptions for everyone, including the board. And I don't mean what it says in your bylaws. because bylaws will say like the chair's job is to, run the meeting, and the vice chair's job, and I'm paraphrasing it. The vice chair's job is to run the meeting when the chair isn't there, and secretary's job is to take the minutes, and all of that stuff. I mean, what is your experience? What has been this, like, if I'm sitting as the chair right now, and I know that I'm going to be cycling off the board, what is my actual job? What has been my actual job? Like we want not standard operating procedures, but kind of SOPs. So it's kind of what we're looking for. And so I recommend job descriptions for everyone. And if we're also thinking about staff transition planning too, I would say the exact same thing. This is not management. This is not something that I would suggest that like the board get in and hold everybody accountable, but it's something that you could work with your director on, is like everybody write their job description. I would say, if you've got somebody that works in your office, do you have an office manager or an office or a front desk or somebody that does that? Okay, they wear so many hats and do so many different things, guaranteed, right? I mean, like there's somebody in your school that does 1,000 different things, and it's not on the job description you hired them for, I'm positive. And so everybody should, like, one of these transition things is that everybody actually have a description of what they actually do. That's just really, really basic. The next thing is, where are records stored? Where are things actually stored? Who has the passwords for them? So the first thing that I recommend because people don't know what the actual role is until somebody has left and they're like, well, I read about this in the bylaws, but I feel like the job was more than that. I feel like sitting in the chair role meant more than just, like presiding over meetings. What am I missing? And so again, this is all technical, but to the extent possible, writing down what might you be missing? Like, as the chair, I am also responsible for grant writing, which somebody may not know, or, something like that. Or I'm responsible for, like throwing the big gala every year, or chairing that, or, something like that. The other piece I have seen go awry is somebody leaves and they knew where the records were. They knew what the passwords were. I saw one where a board member left and they had set up a PayPal account for the school and left with the password. Nobody knew how to get into it, right? Like there was nobody had any other control. So like, who has access to what kind of information? And there should be redundancies in the system for that, so that there's no one person that can leave with access to something, and that somebody else can change that access once somebody leaves. Workflows, documents, guides. I mean, now I am talking a little bit about standard operating procedures, but I once saw, again, and like I'm full of cautionary tales, because like what we remember are like when things go wrong, but the opposite is when folks are doing these things. This is what we don't see, is like the bad things don't happen when these things go right. I once worked with a school that the director left under very poor circumstances. There was nothing electronic in that school. Everything was on paper. He took all of it with him. And there were no records left in that school. And so, having things stored, and that may be what I have next, but like, what are the processes that, like, even at the board level, what is the overview of the year? Like, if I'm new to the board, what does a board calendar look like? Like, what is your process throughout the year? When do you do the budget? Like, when do you bring on new board members? What does my onboarding look like? When do I get access to the policies? Like, what's expected for me to know? Do I get a list of acronyms? Because like, as you know, like we speak in EduSpeak. Nobody knows all of our acronyms. Like, what kinds of things should I expect as a board member? documents, where are those stored? Guides to, do you have governance documents? Those kinds of things, putting together the technical aspects of what the role is, what all of your roles are, and the general role of the board. That's important. And again, for administration, that looks a little different, but doing that too. Creating redundancies in the system wherever possible. So no one person should know everything about something. So I heard you say that like your board member who's leaving has an extensive knowledge of the budget and the audit and all of that. And I think you said Avelia runs like a business consulting. That's great. So use wisdom while you have it. And like, the institutional knowledge piece, like I think it would be really good to have to set up. So what could any one of us train somebody else, train the rest of us on? What is the piece that we brought to the system that could be shared with everybody else so that there's redundancy in knowledge, right? So if somebody knows the budget really well, let's have them teach us what they know about the budget. If somebody knows the bylaws really well, let's have them, walk us through the bylaws. Same with policy, same with running a meeting, those kinds of things. Where are there redundancies in the system? So those were sort of the technical pieces that I recommend. Any questions on any of those before I get to the softer stuff? So what are the more adaptive steps in transition planning? I think community and staff engagement is always going to be really important. Whether you are, looking for an administrator or looking for new board members, how do you recruit? How do you send a message to your community that everything is still okay? Sometimes when there's, and this may not be your situation at all, but sometimes when there's turnover on the board, there's a little bit of like, uh-oh, in the community, or just what does that mean? Because they don't know necessarily what that means, particularly if somebody's leaving who's either been on the board for a long time or is well known for having a lot of institutional knowledge. And so being really communicative with the staff and with community that like, yep, this is what we're doing. This is how we as a board are, adapting to this situation. And we also need to recruit if you do need to recruit, and, putting that out there, that you're actively looking for new folks to be on the board. I think that, when you're talking about transition, having a strong relationship between the board and administration is always going to be a really positive thing. So, as folks cycle off the board, having that underpinning of a really collaborative, strong, trusting relationship between existing board members and admin is really, really important. Dan?
We just got a call, so I'll be right back. All right. The long part about it.
So having that strong and trusting relationship with the board, between admin and the board, really important. And it would be the same thing, if you were transitioning admin, like leaving that in a great place. No matter who's transitioning, always having a foundational relationship of trust, collaboration, and respect, even in disagreement, is a really important thing as you cycle on and off as you transition. A well-planned recruitment process. So whether this is for admin or for board, what do you need? So I'm on a district board now, but I was on a charter school board before that. And when we went to recruit, we had, and I don't know what you have, but we went through a whole process where before we went out to recruit for new board members, we did a needs assessment. And we were like, who is it that we need? Not who, but like, what is it that we need on the board? And we looked for gaps in the folks that we currently have, like where are their gaps? Like, here are your skills, here are your skills, here are your skills. That's great. What are we lacking? Like, what would fill us out as a board? And we really defined it. And then it was our responsibility, each of us, to tap our personal and professional networks and go find folks. Like that was what we did, because none of us were parents at school. And so like we didn't know the community of parents. So a little bit of a different situation, maybe, but that was our responsibility. But the point of that is that we did a needs assessment and a gap analysis of like what are our needs. And so I would really recommend doing that, doing a needs assessment and what is it that you're looking for, and then being really explicit when you go out for, for recruiting. This is what we need. Now that may feel like it's limiting your pool, but I still feel like you start there. You start with what you are needing. And if you can't get that, or if you got like a really like you can't, you don't get anybody there, then I think you broaden that. But like you really start with asking for what you need, because if you don't ask for what you need, you may not get it. And the same thing would be, for an admin transition as well. Obviously, a well-planned recruitment process, that would be the whole thing you'd be focused on in that way. Good job description. I already went over that. Everybody has a good job description, no matter what. That's the first, but that's really important, especially to the recruitment process. And then a robust onboarding process. I hear so much from board members about how they just got thrown onto the board without any preparation. And just, we're just sort of lost, and they felt like they didn't belong, and it took them a while to really get up to speed, and they didn't know where to find anything. They, really felt like maybe having been, a family member or a parent in the school would have advantaged them in knowledge in some way, but then board work was so different that it really didn't advantage them in any way. And I mean, in my own district, like I do this work for a living, and I'm a parent in my own district, and I was totally lost when I started as a board member. And so having a really robust onboarding process with, here are where you find the policies, here are any of the governance documents we have, including, our what am I saying? Our board operating agreements. Here's our director's contract, just for your information, and any other documents you may have that would be important to somebody new, and including roles and responsibilities training. And and Tandlin, I'm going to call on you just for a second, because you've onboarded board members. What would you recommend for an onboarding process that I haven't mentioned?
We just had a turnover from the district that I just left and came to you, Kristen. Before that, we just had quite a rather large turnover in our board. Similar, I feel like when I looked you guys up, it might have been the same to your numbers. Brand new elected and appointed members. And so what I did as my post job, I just welcomed them into the district office first and foremost, and had a meeting with them that was anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half long. They chose that, just depended on their questions and concerns and basically what they needed. I did plan, I had portfolios for them with little binders, every single thing you just mentioned, where that, that superintendent / director contract, so that they could have that. The most important policies, I actually had hard copy printed, because a lot of us just like those hard copy things to hold in our hands and read, at night on the couch while Modern Family is playing, or whatever, but then also had some direction and instruction with some links, even in on a hard copy paper that I gave them, but also I sent that to their email too, so they could just click on that link and get right to all of our policies. And I reminded them, just as we all have to be when we're learning a new program, it's not going to blow up. I can help you fix it if you click something wrong, but they could get there easily and check out all those policies and just navigate through that. I personally feel that a board member should have that policy page right with them all the time. You're going to feel like it's foreign language to you at first, but eventually it's going to become your best friend. And you are going to refer to that over and over and over, because it literally is a directory to your job. And so that's what I did. I also gave them, beside the policy page, I gave them really important phone numbers of each of you, your emails. You know, I shared that for them. So it's kind of just like a big little portfolio of the most important information that they need. And that I got some really great feedback from that. They didn't feel as lost. And I do know I've served boards for years now, and board members mean, just like you guys, to give everything, all for our kiddos. But you're volunteering, you don't really know what you're doing. You know what you want to do, but you don't know what you're doing. So you do need the help from your other board members. And especially, I will never, Kristen knows this about me, I will never not mention enough your board secretary. He or she will literally be your contact person and lead you in the right way. So I hope that helps, Kristen.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for jumping in. Oops. Let me go back to this. So, and obviously, as you know, I'm going to recommend roles and responsibilities training, whether that is, you know, over through our webinars, whether that is through, you know, this kind of thing. Having boards have, any board member have a good knowledge of their role, what it is, what it's not, their limitations and their opportunities, is really important. So let's talk about what you're thinking about transition planning. Like those are my suggestions, both technical and adaptive. What are your thoughts or needs?
Yeah, I think we definitely could use some little bit of housekeeping where we make that binder with, I think, you know, having hard copies of the policies is just a great idea, just to be able to reference. And of course, the ED contracts. And so I think that's something that we need to work on. And I also really appreciate what you said about the board before onboarding or recruiting coming together to discuss what do we need, having that gap analysis that is really helpful. And I think also, as we discussed, I mean, we're a small community, and we talked about doing outreach and, you know, reaching out to parents by just giving them a phone call. And maybe that would help us, you know, if we kind of set that stage where we become approachable and folks, then maybe if we are able to kind of create a nice culture where people feel that the board is approachable and that the board is not just this small group of people, and, you know, we don't, you know, maybe some people don't know what we're up to or what we do.
Right.
As people have those conversations, maybe in the future, the school could have kind of smoother transitions in its board. It's not seen as this, maybe, you know, more of the community would know what the board's role is.
Yeah, anything is a good opportunity for that kind of education about what a board does. As I've said, I probably said this to you. I say it to every single board. No one knows what a board member does, and neither did you before you got on the board. Like no one knows what a board member does, right? And so I think, I mean, your idea for individual phone calls is great because that's an opportunity to do that. And any kind of recruitment that you want to do, there's always an opportunity to then to do some, some like this is what the board does as part of that recruitment. Is a great opportunity for community education.
And the job description, I think anyone who's been on a board for a few months in can start to see, oh, okay, I find myself doing this or that, or being interested in, helping the school in this way or that way. So that I think is just a great kind of personal exercise that.
Yeah, you start writing those and you realize that like you do a lot of stuff that you didn't realize maybe that you did. When I was on a charter school board, prior to being on the district board, my job was as the grant writer. And so I don't know who replaced that role when they replaced me, but somebody did. And then their job was the grant writer. Like that was, if I had written my job description, I would have been like, I write grants. That was my job. And so I think that, that's important for folks to know that, I mean, it's important for the whole board to know like, wow, look at the expectations that we hold ourselves to. And then for the next people to come in, come in with eyes wide open. These are the kinds of things that we do. We may not be putting it on you that like, you're going to be writing grants unless you find a grant writer or somebody who's really interested in that kind of thing. But that's the kind of work of the board, those kinds of things. Other thoughts? Because my next thing is, what do you need from me? That's what I brought for you. What would you like to discuss?
The only other thing I was thinking for that onboarding kind of packet would be good to have the most recent budget, the approved budget.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. That is a great idea for a packet, the most recent budget. And maybe audit would be great. Good financial information. Did you want to talk about committees, Emily? Did you figure out what question you had? No?
No, I just got even more tired. I do, like I have committee stuff that's kind of been bubbling in my head, but I think that maybe I don't think that it's the right time right now for the board in general to explore. So maybe I'll just like pick your brain sometime on the side and then go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. As I always say, I'm your long-term support person, so you can always call me or email me. What else can I do for you tonight? What else do you want to talk about, if anything?
This was really, really helpful for me.
Good.
I learned a lot tonight.
Good.
Yeah, I appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, same. Covered a lot of ground. So thank you.
I hope we covered everything that you wanted to touch on.
And more will come up, I feel like, every day.
Sure. Yeah.
So always question, knowing that you're there is really, really helpful. And
yeah. Happy to be there.
And Kristen, you said you'll email us your slides.
I will. Yeah. How about Marie? Do you want me just to email them to you and then you can send them out to the board, or how does that?
fine.
Okay.
Thank you, Kristen.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Great. Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you. If you need anything from me, let me know.
Tanlin, thank you.
You can go early. Yeah. Thanks, Tanlin, for being here. See you tomorrow.
Thank you for having me, guys. Thank you for letting me sit in. Kristen and I learned a lot from you as well.
Yeah, good to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.